gentlemen, Cabinet Secretary, Honorable Cabinet Secretary for Environment, Natural Resources and Forestry, dear colleagues, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the African Development Bank, I wish to convey first and foremost our appreciation for the invitation to take part in this 9th conference on community-based adaptation. Many individuals and institutions have contributed and worked tirelessly to make this meeting a success. 2015 is a year that is immensely significant in the global development space. Discussions on the post-2015 global development agenda are high, as well as the expected global climate agreement in Paris at the end of this year. So this conference could not have come at a better time, and both these major global initiatives have immense implications for the communities. Now, the theme of this meeting, measuring and enhancing effective adaptation, is ideally where we, and especially those of us who are engaged in financing climate change investments, ought to begin. I want to share only 3 perspectives with you this morning, and I hope that that will situate our discussion for the next 3 or so days, and in the end be able to come up with at least not prescriptions, but commonly shared positions that can enable us to engage all stakeholders in ensuring that we can sustainably finance climate change adaptation programs at the community level. The first question is of financing climate change programs in Africa. We need to ask ourselves, how effective have we been over the past decade? And what lessons have we learned? Now, in 2011, the African Development Bank, together with other multilateral development institutions, initiated a program that aimed to track and report climate investments, especially in Africa, and of course, funds going to developing economies. In 2013, this analysis showed that the MDBs with significant presence in Africa approved up to US $952 million to support adaptation programs in sub-Saharan Africa. Now, out of this amount, nearly half of it came from the African Development Bank. When you consider the fact that globally, $4.8 billion was approved in that year, so Africa received less than 1/5 of adaptation financing from the MDBs. So that should indicate to us where we stand. We have made eloquent speeches. We have bemoaned how vulnerable Africa is. But I think these figures illustrate just how well we are doing in attracting the required finances to support adaptation programs in Africa. So, ladies and gentlemen, it will be extremely difficult for us to be able to sustain effective adaptation programs at the community level if we do not have sufficient and predictable financing. My second point, and this ties very well with the concerns that have been raised by my previous colleagues, is the role of private sector, especially the role of the private sector in climate change adaptation. And I want to share with you again some figures so as to see how we are performing in this regard. In 2013, I've already given you a figure of 952 million that the MDBs, the Multilateral Development Bank, which includes the African Development Bank, the World Bank, International Finance Corporation, all together delivered that amount. And all of it was delivered through the public sector for adaptation. And maybe there's nothing odd. Maybe there's nothing strange in that situation. But when you look at mitigation aspect, The same year, for the same region, Sub-Saharan Africa, the MDBs approved $2.1 billion US. 60% of this amount was delivered by the private sector. 60%. On adaptation, 100% was delivered by the public sector. So why are we failing to attract the private sector to finance adaptation programs? Is it the case that we cannot create bankable business opportunities for the private sector? I think this is a fundamental question for this conference, and I hope that at the end of our 3-4 days of deliberations, we'll come up with some positions and some recommendations. My final point, which is perhaps the most important, is a question of climate finance readiness. And we've talked about this in many conferences. Many of you have been engaged in the UNFCCC negotiation process. Africa is ready. The African Development Bank believes that we need to stop discussing the question of readiness and look for funds, deliver the funds to the communities, engage the stakeholders, and structure financing in a way that will attract the private sector, in a way that will enable the communities to access them, and in a way that will deliver effective and sustainable results on the ground. For those of us who are following the GCF, the Green Climate Fund, the progress in the accreditation process, last month, the board accredited 7 institutions. One of them came from Africa. This is the Centre de Suivi Écologique, or known as CSC in Senegal. It's a small institution. So this is a very positive development. A small institution, having been the first to be accredited in the continent. We expect that in the next meeting of the GCF board in July, many more institutions in the continent will be accredited, of course, including the African Development Bank. But already, allow me to conclude by highlighting that the African Development Bank, even as we stand here today, has financing instruments that are open to support direct community access, direct access by communities, as well as institutions, research institutions, NGOs, and even government. 2 examples. We have the African Climate Change Fund, which is basically a climate readiness early preparation facility. We also have the Clean Them Special Fund, which supports, to a large extent, community-based adaptation programs. I think these funds could provide early opportunities for bankable adaptation programs that could demonstrate the extent to which, even with limited resources, we can take actions in building resilience of African communities. But we are also quite active in the knowledge space. Later, next month, the African Development Bank, in partnership with WWF, will be launching a very important analytical piece of work, a report that's looking at Africa's ecological futures. We think that community-based adaptation programs cannot be successful unless they are consistent with the sustainability of our ecological resources. And so we believe that these knowledge products also contribute to enhancing our capacity to measure the impacts of investments in community-based adaptations, as well as ability to ascertain the sustainability ecologically and economically. So with these few remarks, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to wish you a very successful deliberations for the next 2-3 days, and the African Development Bank is ready to work with all of you. And thank you very much.